Well, I want to thank the spiritual team and the library here for the invitation to come and speak with you. I know that there's a No Kings Rally taking place right now as well, which is also good, but I'm glad that, folks were able to come out. Yeah, no Kings. So I want to thank you all for the invitation to be here with you today. It's been quite a journey for the last 9 years working in buffalo bison restoration. I use that term interchangeably. Of course, the scientists tell us that bison is the correct term, but buffalo is a term more commonly used in our Native American communities. It's in a lot of family names, and so buffalo is still an appropriate term for the animal, despite we know that scientists refer to the animal as bison. But this is seen in our communities as a relative, and I want to thank the Eastern Shoshone and Northern Arapaho tribes for their support in this work. It's been quite a journey to get where we are with buffalo. As Kyle alluded to, I wear several hats in regards to the buffalo. I've been the tribe's buffalo manager for 9 years or so, and in that capacity sit on the board of the Intertribal Buffalo Council. And Intertribal Buffalo Council is a membership of 87 tribes across the country, from Florida to New York to Alaska, and then 19 states in between. ITBC has restored about 25,000 bison to tribal lands, to 65 herds in 22 states in the last 30 years. So a very important organization for tribes. And then I also work for the National Wildlife Federation's Tribal Partnerships Program. And in that capacity, we built resolution-based agreements with the 2 tribes at Wind River to help bring the necessary funding and resources to build out these buffalo programs. And then we formed the Wind River Tribal Buffalo Initiative, which is a nonprofit there at home to work with and support both the Eastern Shoshone and Northern Arapaho tribes' buffalo efforts. I sit on the board of the Conservation Lands Foundation to help work on protecting existing conservation lands, many of which are under threat today. So very fortunate to be a part of several of these organizations that are incredibly important for tribes and conservation work, and then also working at home in my own community, which has been very important. About 20 years ago, I had the opportunity to visit East Africa with my dad, and we spent some time in the Serengeti and the Masai Mara. And then I traveled around for 6 months in Kenya, Tanzania, and Uganda when I was 18, and that was very formative experiences that I had there, not only with the wildlife and being able to witness the wildebeest and the expanse of land that has no roads and no fences, and you see the biodiversity in these wildebeest. You see zebras and giraffes and rhinos and cheetahs and lions. About 30 to 40 species intermixed in this migration. So that was pretty incredible to witness that. But even more kind of unfathomable for me was that this is less than 5% of what the bison was here less than 200 years ago. And so when I came home, I had a newfound appreciation. This experiences that I had in East Africa really formed a lot of who I am today. My wife is here with me, Patty, and she didn't like me before I went to Africa. She liked me after I got back because I was maybe a little more mature or something. But she's I'm glad she laughed at that. But the cognitive dissonance, the experiences, and the people and the wildlife that I had there were very important. And as I came home to my own backyard, realizing our people, our history, is tied to these places, and not only on the reservation, but also in our region. You know, our Shoshone people, we called the eastern band of Shoshones the Gwitchandika, the buffalo eaters, and we distinguished ourselves by the foods that we ate. So the Tukadikas were the sheep eaters that we're all familiar with. Over the mountain was the Agadikas, the fish eaters. The Comanches were the wild carrot eaters. And our language goes clear down to Central America, and I'll show you a map of that here shortly. But these lodges that are in the back here were made from buffalo hide, and it would take 16 to 18 hides to make a lodge. And so these are the buffalo eaters, the eastern band of Shoshones, and this is where we come from. Is these folks who relied on not only the buffalo, but the relationship that we had with our foods, our medicines, and the medicine wheel that really talks and demonstrates a lot about how we used to live with the land. It's tied to the cosmos, the seasons. If you look in the dictionary and look up nomadic, it says wandering aimlessly. We weren't wandering aimlessly. We had a good idea of where we were going and for what. And this is how we utilized, large territories of land, because we would harvest and access different foods and medicines at different times of the year. And so this medicine wheel has a lot of metaphysical properties to it. Our connection to the cosmos, which dictated a lot of when our ceremonies were, the different foods that we would eat in the summer, spring, fall, winter. And this corresponds to even our own lives, and we utilize this medicine wheel type of philosophy in helping our people heal, because we also go through similar cycles, and this is part of holistic thinking and understanding of growing from a baby, a youth, to an adult, to an elder. There's balance in this that's demonstrated mentally, physically, spiritually, emotionally. And this medicine wheel philosophy, which is even tied to our pictographs and petroglyphs, is also tied to our ceremonies that we still continue to practice today. And so, as you can see, there's different foods that were eaten and harvested at different times of the year. And that's medicine wheel is an important symbol, because the circle is oftentimes the most abundant thing that we find in nature. You throw a rock into a water, it makes a circle. Those birds make their nests in circles. You cut a tree, you see the tree rings. This understanding that the people had about the natural laws and principles that exist also were very important in our own daily life and thinking. The buffalo was part of our Sundance religion, belief systems. You can't have a Sundance without buffalo. And we were able to continue to practice these ceremonies despite the buffalo's absence. And we still have the songs, we still have the ceremonies, fortunately, that point to this very important role that buffalo have in our lives. If we look back to the past, we had our health and wealth was tied to the biodiversity of plants and animals. We would harvest pronghorn at different times of the year. We would utilize those quills from the porcupine, the birds. We refer to these animal relatives as part of our extended family. And in Shoshone language, we say Damat Merawura, all our relatives. In Arapaho, it says Besihi Neteena. Sometimes you hear the Lakota's phrase Mitakuye Oyasi. This refers to our relatives that are the winged ones, the four-legged ones, the ones that fly, the ones that swim above and below the ground, the ones that swim in the water. The biodiversity in plants and animals is where our health and wealth was historically tied. And not only for the Eastern Shoshone and Northern Arapaho, but more than 574 federally recognized tribes across the country. And these maps you don't often see or hear about. It wasn't really taught in our educational system of the history of the people that were here on this continent. And so this is a map that generally shows where those tribes are, and each of these tribes would have had a similar relationship with the foods and the medicines and the landscape that provided all of those things to those people. For instance, in the Southwest, they were dryland agriculturalists. In the Great Lakes region, those people depended on the fish and the rice. The Great Plains tribes really relied heavily on that buffalo and the bison. The salmon in the Northwest. For the Shoshone people, we are some of the northernmost speaking, the Numic branch of the Uto-Aztecan dialect. So you can see all of these tribes are of the Shoshonean language base that comes from Otwa, way down in Central America. Prior to westward expansion, we had a vast trade network that existed amongst tribes and tribal people. And as you can see there, kind of in the middle of the map, right in here, the Shoshone people would bring relatives from the south, from the east, north, and west, and this was how we would trade. It wasn't a money-based system, it was a barter system, a buffalo economy, if you will, for how we would trade with those different tribes. When I returned from Africa and I had an understanding of some of this history that has happened over the centuries, realizing that every treaty, every promise that the federal government made with tribes has been broken or violated in some form or fashion. So this is the diminishment of Native American lands from 1800 to present day. So you can see the loss of land that occurred to present day right there. For the Shoshone people, the very first treaty made was in 1863, called the Fort Bridger Treaty, and this established a 44 million acre reservation. And as westward expansion continued to happen, we had the Oregon Trail, the California Trail, Mormon Trail, the Pony Express. All of this westward expansion came through that original reservation in that 1863 treaty. And so this is a map superimposed on a modern day map. Of course, the reservation was created before the state, but it would have included a good share of the state of Wyoming, northern Colorado, northern Utah, and eastern Idaho, and a good share of Yellowstone. And so it was understood by the federal government at that time that we utilized the vast territory. But because of the westward expansion that was coming through this reservation in 1863, it was only 5 years later that our reservation was reduced to that. So that's what happened between 1863 and 1868. There were further losses of land that happened, like the southern portion of this reservation called the Bruno Cession, and that was from Lander to South Pass. Of course, gold was discovered in South Pass, and we had a big steel mill, so there's been a lot of extraction and material wealth that has been extracted from that portion. That little sliver up here by Thermopolis, that was called the McLaughlin Agreement, and McLaughlin drew zeros at the ends to make it 10 miles by 10 miles. It was supposed to be 1 mile by 1 mile, and so that big chunk was taken out of the reservation. And then in 1906, all lands north of the river were ceded. So that's the Big Wind River that cuts through the reservation. And so all lands north of the Big Wind River were ceded in 1906. And so we lost a good share of the land in that time. And this is a map here that was created at that time to show the Wind River Reservation. Interestingly, Fremont County still only recognizes the 1906 treaty. And if you go to the Fremont County map server, that's what they show. But by congressional act in 1938, unoccupied lands north of the river were returned to the tribes, minus the Riverton Reclamation Project, which is that big chunk out of the middle. That's Riverton and Kinnear and Pavilion. And so we've had very contentious water rights battles. The longest running court case in the history of Wyoming is called the Bighorn case, over who controls water on the reservation. It's called the Bighorn case because as the Wind River leaves the reservation, it changes name right there at Thermopolis. And so the Bighorn is the Wind River. But there's still a lot of challenge to water rights and land jurisdiction, ownership, and management there on the reservation. Partly because it was federally encouraged. So as lands in the reservations in the West were opened up to homesteading, you saw flyers and propaganda, advertising Indian lands for pennies per acre. And this is why Riverton and Kinnear and Pavilion were created in the first place. So as we lost that land in the Riverton Reclamation Project in 1938, the tribes at that time also designated the very first wilderness area 26 years before the Federal Wilderness Act. This 180,000 acres is very important habitat for deer and elk, but also wolves and bears. We have 265 lakes on the reservation. The majority of them are in this wilderness area. Very important conservation step that the tribes took in the 30s to protect a little bit of what we had left. I learned a lot about conservation from my dad, Richard Baldus. He's a retired project leader for the Fish and Wildlife Service. And I got to witness as a little boy the reintroduction of pronghorn antelope and bighorn sheep back to the reservation. Prior to 1984, pronghorn antelope and bighorn sheep were extirpated. And so as a project leader, he worked closely with the Wyoming Game and Fish Department, our tribal fishing game, and worked to get these species restored to the tribes and to the reservation. When he was doing this work, I was just a little boy, but he told me, you'll be able to hunt antelope, pronghorn, before too long. And so this was my very first pronghorn antelope I killed when I was 11 years old. And I've been able to hunt and harvest antelope almost every year since. And that is a success story that we continue to celebrate. And I did harvest one bighorn sheep several years ago as well. So we have these species back and restored in a meaningful way. A lot of what my dad was working on really was finding common ground in bringing Western thought and Western science and bridging that with our traditional ecological knowledge. That wasn't even really a coined term in his day, but working to provide a holistic relationship with our fisheries and our wildlife to restore that sustenance, to restore that food source back to our communities was very important. So in 1984, the tribes created this game code, and the state of Wyoming was going to assume jurisdiction on the reservation because they said that we didn't have a constitution and therefore no sovereignty. And the tribe said to the state of Wyoming, to heck with you guys, we're going to develop our own law to protect our own wildlife on our reservation, and the game code was created. That allowed for the reintroduction of pronghorn antelope and bighorn sheep, but also protections for those other species like elk. And what was predicted would happen did, and that was that if we protected and put seasons on hunting, that we would be able to grow these populations to a level that we hadn't seen before, that we'd be able to restore that sustenance for our community members who have always been hunters and fishermen and gatherers, and to be able to provide that opportunity for our tribal members was very important. This is actually old data, 2013. We even have more elk, deer, and pronghorn now in the last decade than this map here. In the 90s, we went to our elders for several years to ask, what do wolves and bears mean to our community? And our elders, most of whom are gone now, that provided this information, they said that the wolves belong. They help remove the sick animals. We learned how to take care of our family members by watching the wolves and emulating them. We learned about medicines that the bears use that we still utilize in our ceremonies. So the elders said we need to protect and allow for these animals to exist. And so in the 90s we wrote these comprehensive management plans for protecting wolves and bears on the reservation as well. Very important history that also sheds light on why buffalo as wildlife is important and not livestock. Many people don't know that we have 4 extinct species of bison in this continent. They've been here for about 400,000 years. Way back to latifrons, which had a 9-foot horn span, was about 10 foot at the shoulder. So latifrons, antiquus, priscus, occidentalis, we find these bones and things still around. And Amy Phillips from Atisi recently did a cranium study on people that have found buffalo skulls. And so just hearing about how Amy has worked with local people in the Bighorn Basin on finding some of these buffalo skulls has been some interesting science behind that. Today we have the bison, which is our plains buffalo. That's generally the one that we think of down here, but there's also the wood bison that exists up in Canada and in parts of Alaska. So the 2 species, wood bison and plains bison, are what we have on this continent. There's also European bison, 4 extinct species over there. And in some places in Europe, they're restoring buffalo bison because of its ecological role as a keystone species. It's been absent from the people, but they realize the important ecological importance of them and are restoring buffalo to Poland, and I believe there were even some buffalo in Ukraine that were killed during the war even. So maybe some of the other folks in the room may be more familiar with the European bison efforts, but they are in several places in Europe and Asia restoring that species of bison. As we think about our own history of what happened to bison in this country, we have to think about how the animal was really nearly annihilated. It was the largest migratory herd in world history, the buffalo that existed here when Lewis and Clark came west in 1804. By 1902, there were less than 1,000 buffalo on the continent. And so it took not even 100 years for the buffalo to go from 60 million conservatively to less than 1,000. Think about that wildebeest population over there in East Africa. That's just 1.5 million. So when the buffalo was killed off, oftentimes the meat was there left to rot. And after several decades or several years, they would go back in on wagons and clean up the bones. And they actually made more money on the bones than they did on the hides and tongues. But we killed off the largest herd in world history and then erased all evidence of it by picking up all them bones. Fortunately, we still find some here and there, but that bottleneck of the species had a drastic impact on cattle, on genetics. And most of the buffalo in the United States today, about 300,000, have some level of cattle gene introgression. Back in the early, mid-1800s and on, they tried to create a better cow. They force bred cattle and buffalo to create things like cattle, or switching the sex ratio to make beefalo. So what this did was introduce the cattle genetics into the bison genome. And so you can see that the majority of bison in the United States have cattle gene introgression. We focus primarily on those conservation genetics, the sliver in the yellow and red. The red is indicative of tribal conservation herds, which ours at Wind River are included. And that sliver in yellow represents the Department of Interior, who manages 19 conservation herds across the country. So we've preferentially brought animals that have little to no cattle gene introgression, because we wanted to start with the best genetics that we could get. If you look across the country, there's only 5 herds that are at 1,000 animals or more needed to maintain genetic heterogeneity. So bison is essentially still ecologically extinct. They do not exist in large numbers on large landscapes. And this map shows how important those populations are in maintenance of the bison genome, because there's already so many buffalo that are in the ranching community that are livestock essentially. And so we want to think about how do we change that paradigm to think about how we can restore this animal in a meaningful way across the country. Tribes have an important role to play. If we look at our histories, they're similar in that we are now on remnants of our once former vast territories. Buffalo in parks and refuges and private ranches, and tribes on reservations. And so we have a unique and tied history together. There's 49 tribes that have historic ties to Yellowstone. Yellowstone is one of those conservation populations that are so important because of the population of buffalo in Yellowstone being that last remnant population of the descendants of those larger herds. So Yellowstone is very important to many tribes across the country, including wanting access to those buffalo to improve their own herds, to improve their own herd genetics. When we think about our relationship to the buffalo, it's like our walking store. And when we talk to the kids, we say, where do you go when you need stuff? And they say, Walmart or Target or the store. What we want to emphasize is that this was our store. It had everything that we needed from the hoof up. And today, even though we're not living in teepees or hunting buffalo off horseback, we still have a contemporary use of many of these items. The meat of buffalo is also one of the healthiest protein sources that we can get. It's the highest in irons and vitamins and omegas and lowest in fat and cholesterol than any other meat. Native American people have the highest rates of diabetes and other diet-related conditions that's directly attributable from the removal of buffalo from our grandparents' diet. We've been able to feed some of our elders buffalo now, and doctors are taking them off of insulin. We have a number of cases of that already. And so the nutritional importance of buffalo and getting that back into our diet is incredibly important. Go Cats. I don't know if there's any cats in there. My wife and I spent 10 years in Bozeman. I got my undergraduate and graduate degrees in land resource sciences at Montana State. And while there, really focused on buffalo restoration from an academic level. So as an undergraduate, put together a draft management plan for buffalo restoration at Wind River, which we still largely operate from. And then in grad school, I looked at the cultural plant biodiversity in relic wallows. The behavior of buffalo and their grazing activities promote growth of plants that are historically foods and tools and medicines. And so even though these relic wallows are over 130 years old, they still serve a purpose in plant biodiversity. Cultural plants are foods and tools and medicines. Their unique behavioral and physiological adaptations make them extremely beneficial on the land. And one of the unique behaviors is wallowing. So this is what they do. They do it from a young age all the way to older, and they'll go back and use the same wallow. They'll make new ones, but these micro depressions in the landscape are very important for water accumulation and seed dispersal. If they're on a landscape long enough, they're essentially making their own water holes. In high elevation desert, that can be very important. So they're very important in the way they interact with the land itself. They're keystone species, which means that they benefit many other organisms like prairie dogs and black-footed ferrets and badgers. Many birds need buffalo hair for their eggs to reach the right incubation temperature, and when we restore buffalo, we see things like ferruginous hawks and burrowing owls and mountain plovers return. These are 3 species of concern by the Fish and Wildlife Service. They're coming back when you restore buffalo. The cowbird, that's a misnomer, it should be called the buffalo bird, also returns. But many of these species are culturally sensitive species, important birds and other animals that, again, are part of our health and wealth, including the sage grouse, which we anticipate will hopefully come back to the reservation in time because the buffalo are present.